My friends, welcome to another night shift, and tonight is gonna be quite different, hence this unusual opening. And it's gonna be different because we're about to do something we haven't done on this channel like ever. We're gonna be building a building. Now, we have a tank, we have figures, we have the basic shape of the diorama, and this pink contraption is where we should fit the building as a sort of backdrop for the whole scene. So I have pink foam, which I'm gonna use as a sort of skeleton for the building, for the initial shape. I also have gray foam, which is thicker and thus it has no texture, which makes it perfect for making individual bricks. And I also have balsa wood, which will come in handy for timbers, planks, window frames, and so on. And I'm also gonna try printing the whole roof, like tile by tile. So let's take a look at it and let's hope it's not gonna be a complete flustercluck. As with most first-timers, my start was quite bumpy. You see, I thought that using random blocks of foam and sort of trying to fit them onto the base would be a great idea. This turned out to not work at all, because right now I'm being limited by the material at hand. So let's go for a different approach. I had to sit down for a while and draw a simple sketch of the building. And instead of making up random shapes, I actually googled some inspiration. A proper rural German barn which is gonna fit perfectly with my composition. With a clear vision in my mind, cutting the base skeleton for the house was a lot easier. I'm saying easier because it still came with some complications. I actually had only a vague idea of what I'm doing, because until this point I only used this eBay foam cutter for basic square shapes. But now I suddenly need to cut specific angles. It took me a while to figure out how to cut angled lines, and instead of messing with the ruler, you actually have to move the cutting wire to one side or the other. To my absolute delight, this actually looks like the barn I originally envisioned. You know, not too small, not too big, nice shapes, and putting it at an angle like this ensures the whole thing won't look like a stage backdrop, but instead like an actual part of the scenery which continues way beyond the borders of the diorama. Before we proceed any further though, I need to cut off the excess. Being more familiar with my foam cutter now, this time I actually know how things work. And needless to say, it's like a modern laser technology from the future. Now we have a house that sits perfectly flush with the edge of the base, except it doesn't fit together for some reason.
A few
cuts
later.
Alright, now we're talking. It seems like everything is in order, so let's proceed and make some foam bricks. This is a trick which I learned from Black Magic Craft, but in fact we have two options when it comes to individual bricks. We can either cut them from cork sheets or from foam. Now obviously when I saw his video I was completely mind blown, so I had to give it a try. I'm cutting the dense foam into sheets which are about 2 mm thick. Then we cut those into Minecraft noodles, which are also 2 mm thick. I'm sort of trying to keep basic brick dimensions in mind, except their depth, because that's not gonna be an issue in this project. And finally, we take all our noodles and cut actual bricks from them. They should be around 7 or 8 mm long in 1/35 scale. With this technique you can make a million bricks in one evening, and I'm certainly making way more than I'm gonna need, but what can you do when it's so fun? What isn't so fun is separating them from one another, because the heat sort of glues them together, but you know, all of a sudden we have about, I don't know, a few thousand bricks for sure. Now we need to give them some texture. We put a few sharp jagged rocks into a bottle. Then we add our bricks and give it a very good shake. And all of a sudden we have tons of bricks with rounded edges and some subtle texture. And lots of hair for whatever reason. Anyway, let's go bricklaying. I think it's a neat idea to start with the bottom row to sort of make a good foundation for everything. But there's something even more important. Corners. Luckily, there's only one on my project, and the way I'm gonna deal with it is by cutting those bricks under a roughly 45-degree angle and gluing them together. My cutting technique can be definitely improved, but acrylic wood filler is gonna take care of this issue, at least I hope it will. It actually gives them some additional texture, so that's pretty cool, I guess. Once everything is firmly dried up, we can cut every other brick into a half brick. I don't know if this is the best way to do it. To be fair, it wasn't a lot of fun, and I'm glad there's only one corner, so if you know any better way, please let me know. Now I'm gonna lay down the empty wall, which is gonna have no windows or any other features. It's quite surprising how strong PVA glue holds this foam together. It's like super glue, except actual super glue will melt the foam, so we have to use PVA. I'd say it's not too bad for a first try, although, yeah, the spacing could have been more neat, but let's pretend the shed was built additionally by socially exhausted craftsmen, let's put it that way. One thing they won't teach you in school is that you should never have any odd brick offcuts if you want the whole building to be structurally sound. Because of this, I'm using the sketch and the bottom row to position the door frame. Cutting balsa wood is like going through paper, and sanding, that's like going through air. Long story short, it's much more pleasant than making fake wood from plastic. After gluing the door frame in place and making sure everything is at 90-degree angles, I can proceed with more bricks. And now there will be no awkward offcuts, always just 3 full bricks and 2 halves. In other words, our shed won't fall apart. When you're working with wood, I find it quite important to give it a coat of diluted PVA glue or maybe clear acrylic varnish. This way we'll eliminate most of the fuss and it won't soak up paints later down the road. We'll actually paint the whole building in the next episode, next week. Okay, the shed is done, at least for now, so let's proceed with the barn and put some of that gained knowledge to good use. First of all, the barn is framed by timbers. I did a similar thing like with those corner bricks, so I've cut 2 planks at a roughly 45-degree angle so they could, match up nicely. I made a small mistake though, but some wood filler will take care of that, and actually it'll look like the wood is sort of rotten. Now we can glue the remaining timbers and continue with more bricks. This time I'm placing them much tighter, which it simply looks nicer and also more realistic. Let's pretend the barn was built earlier and more TLC went into it. However, I made a small, well, it's actually quite big, mistake. When measuring the bricks and placement of the large barn door frame, I completely ignored the fact the whole door is not gonna be centered with the roof. Lesson learned for the next time. In order to proceed further, I have to glue both buildings together. There's just no way around it. Again, PVA glue works surprisingly well. It's so strong you wouldn't be able to break them apart. With that out of the way, I can add remaining bricks into the corner, sort of, tucking them behind the shed wall. Now, before I continue with more details, I need to take care of the back invisible wall, so to say. I know, someone will say, well, why didn't you make the interior so we could see what's inside? And truth be told, if there's no story taking place inside of the building, having visible interior from the other side adds nothing to the diorama. If it was a destroyed building or there was some ambush taking place inside, then yeah, sure, totally. But this way it's not gonna draw any attention from the main story, and once the diorama is finished and this entire wall is painted black, it's actually gonna look pretty slick. I'm not going to cut away the excess wood yet, because I don't want any of it protruding where it shouldn't. For example, I'll try to blend it with bricks here. I hope I'm making sense, because most of what I'm doing is just a bunch of random ideas and hoping for the best. Anyway, with all bricks in place, we can fill the gaps with mortar. I'm using good old humble plaster, and as someone who hasn't used plaster in modeling for at least 15 years, I'm absolutely blown away how sturdy it is once it dries. So the theory is to smear the plaster over the entire wall. You don't have to be neat or anything, and then just wipe the excess off with a moist sponge. If the plaster is very thin though, it's gonna leave large air pockets, which you then have to fill again and again until they're all gone. So thick plaster works much better, but you have to sort of stipulate between the bricks. Once you wipe it off, there should be almost no bubbles. And the overall process is actually very enjoyable. We can remove it even further with a stiff paintbrush and some tap water, but this should be done before it dries completely. With the walls being done, we can turn our attention to the roof. I'm not going for a super detailed timber structure, just a very basic thing that's gonna look like there's something actually down there. And the actual roof is gonna be made from thick paper or thin cardboard. I don't know. The fact this paper comes from the kit box, like from the tank that's gonna be in this diorama, it adds absolutely no value to anything, but I think it's pretty cool. Paper is easy to cut, it's even easier to glue, and I can even more easily draw guidelines for the roof tiles on it. With this being done, I think it's as good a time as any to finally cut the excess wall and make it all look nice and clean. Thankfully, there's no elbow grease required because balsa is just so soft. However, we can't make any mistakes here because that would be really hard to fix. So instead of cutting it completely flush on the first try, I consider sanding to be a much safer option. It also feels kinda nice to finally sand a natural material that's not gonna turn you into a zombie if you inhale some of the dust. Anyway, told you it's gonna look slick. This was actually the most nerve-wracking part of the entire build, so let's hope the rest is gonna be endless fun. Before I start adding any more woodwork, it's important to paint the hidden foam black. This way, when there's gaps or broken planks, you'll see just darkness inside, which is very poetic. The thinnest balsa strip I have is 1mm, and that's quite a lot for 1/35 scale planks, so instead I'm using a 0.5mm veneer. This is definitely not balsa wood, it actually feels like cutting through steel, but you know, the wood is thin and it's warped, which is exactly what I wanted because the same thing can be seen in my reference picture. And because it's so warped, holding it in place with super glue is much easier because with PVA, the planks were constantly flying off. Super glue means there's no waiting time, so I can immediately punch a few holes for nails and cut off the excess. And now we can proceed to the moment a lot of you were definitely waiting for. 3D printing. So the 3D model is my own creation, and as such I can't guarantee it's 100 historically accurate or anything. But hey, it looks like a wavy roof tile, so it's good enough, at least for me. I was able to fill the entire build plate on my Photon Mono SE with 130 pieces, and I ended up printing around 8 batches of them. With a few dozen leftovers, so all things considered, I'd say there's gonna be just shy of 1000 tiles on the roof. I know, I should be wearing gloves when handling prints, but truth is, if you're careful, you won't come into contact with the resin at all. I always clean my prints in acetone, which works faster than industrial alcohol, and once they're clean and dry, under the UV lamp they go. After 2 minutes of hardening, they're ready to use, and there's no cleanup necessary, you just break them off right off their supports. So if you're interested, the downloadable file is available on my Patreon. Gluing them in place goes just as you can imagine. They should go in a straight line and slightly overlap each other. As such, we need to start laying them down from the bottom. So this means drawing guidelines, which are roughly 7mm apart, and then dipping each tile into superglue and placing it on the roof. The time-lapse does a better job than me explaining it. All I can say is that it feels great seeing the roof slowly grow tile by tile. And of course, I believe this approach gives us much better results than some prefabricated roof, which would be just too perfect for this type of building. I made sure to leave enough overhang over the back invisible wall, because if we want it to look all tidy, we need to cut the excess off. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but hey, if this works, then it ain't stupid. Just this time it's vital to wear some protection because resin dust is the worst poison in the world, so please be careful. Let's not forget these metal shingles or whatever they're called. It's just pewter foil because I was too lazy to design and print those. And of course some missing timber detail from the bottom. Okay, we're almost done, so let's wrap it up, my friends. Doors are quite simple, but I'm sure many of you were wondering how I'm gonna deal with windows. So here's the trick. I've cut the frame, dry fitted it so to say inside the window frame and glued it carefully together with super glue, making sure I won't glue it to the model. Once it's dry I can sand it flush, again being super careful so it won't break, and some quick cleanup with diluted PVA will finish the job. Now we need to make the void, so to say, behind the window. So we use the frame as a guide and we cut into the foam around it. Make sure it goes all the way around because this is quite important. Now we can simply gouge the foam out, and because we have that guide carved in, anything beyond it will remain untouched. Once we have a hole that's deep enough, we paint everything black. The final step in this illusion is to use clear foil for glass, and once it's weathered, the whole thing is gonna look as if there, is an interior, it's just too dark inside. However, I'll be doing that in the next episode after everything is painted and weathered. Let's now get back to those doors. Obviously they need some hinges. I think pewter foil is excellent for these types of details because it's so easy to bend, and this allows us to make the hinge detail almost as realistic as it gets. So even if they're not gonna be workable, they'll still look as if they actually could work. Pewter is soft, so you can even punch bolts out of it, and for these I'm using a 0.4mm drill bit as a puncher, so to say. We are huge fans of black superglue on this channel, because it gives you plenty of time to position small details like these without them getting stuck forever in 0.1 seconds. And what's even cooler about black superglue, cleaning it up with debonder is very easy because you can see it, so there will be no nasty hidden surprises after we paint the whole thing. The final touch is to add some additional details like braces and some rudimentary locks on these doors. And with that, we're actually done for this week. So the next video will be all about painting and weathering, and it's gonna be another thing which is gonna be a total first time experience for me, because scale buildings, I have never done that in my life, not even as a kid when I was doing these very embarrassing looking dioramas. So I hope you'll join me for that, next week, same time. In the meantime, there's not much left to say other than this was a very enjoyable experience, and the only thing I regret are those off-center barn doors. But on the other hand, a lot of my patrons said it's quite normal, especially when you have animal stalls inside, like, for example, pigs on one side and horses on the other, and naturally the horse side needs more space. Yeah, I think excuses don't get any better than that, so I'm gonna roll with it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, my friends. If you like what you saw, leave me a like, dislike if you didn't like it, and subscribe if you wanna see more videos like this, because I'm posting all the time. And a huge shout out goes to my patrons, who are not only the official sponsors of this channel, but they are also a source of valuable feedback for me. And in return, you can get some nice rewards as a patron. There's DMs, so we can get in touch, frequent updates from all my projects, so you can watch them grow, so to say, in real time. We have 1 week early ad-free videos, so you could watch the painting and weathering episode right now. And there's also the super nice studio photos, which are downloadable in full resolution if that's something you'd like. And last but not least, 3D models for those of you who have resin printers. The roof tile, for example, is just one of several small things which I've modeled so far. There's also ammunition canisters, metal bowls, smoke dischargers for tanks. I mean, it's not a ton of stuff, but I keep adding more with every project of mine because there's always something worth printing. Anyway, that's gonna be it, my friends. So until the next week, stay safe, have fun, keep building models because they're not gonna build themselves, okay? And most importantly, stay awesome. Cheers!